Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome to the Audit and Governance Committee, Tuesday the 25th of February. I'm Councillor Emily Smith and I'll be chairing this evening. This meeting is being held at our office in Abbey House, Abingdon. Voting members are here in person, but officers and public speakers are able to join remotely via Teams. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded on the Council's YouTube channel for public viewing. The evacuation procedure: if there is an emergency, please evacuate the building by the nearest exit, which is in the corridor immediately to our right of this meeting room, and the assembly point is point 9. On arriving at this meeting, you should have read the emergency evacuation procedure and signed the fire register. If you haven't done that, could you just let them services know? For those of you joining remotely, when you're not speaking, please ensure your microphone is muted and camera is off. Could everyone make sure their mobile phones are on silent, or other devices are switched to silent as well? But we will be using devices during the meeting to look at papers and things like that. If councillors wish to speak or participate in the debate, if you could raise your hands and I'll call you in turn. And then finally, some motions or recommendations this evening will need council-specific votes on them. So we've got quite a few that apply to one council and then the other one separately. So I'll let you know if we need to do that. I've just had a couple of messages from Councillor Rawlings and Councillor Roberts to say that they're running late because of the traffic and stuck in traffic at the moment. So they'll join us as soon as they can. Right, okay, so that brings me to apologies for absence. Becky, have we had any?
Yeah, so thank you, Chair. We have received apologies from Councillor Tony Morgan, and I believe Councillor Ed Sadler is intending to join us as substitute.
And yeah, as you said, Councillor Roberts and Councillor Rawlings will hopefully join us shortly, but we are quorate, so we can start the meeting anyway. So the first thing we need to do is the minutes from last time. So can I just see if anybody's got any queries on the minutes from last time? And if not,
I move,
yeah, Councillor Audit. I'm happy to second that we adopt those as a true record of the meeting. Everyone happy? Councillor Skinner? You're right with the minutes from last time?
Ecstatic.
Excellent, good. I will sign those at the end of the meeting. Okay, so the next item is declarations of interest. Does anybody have any member of the committee have anything to declare at this point? So obviously if something occurs to you during the meeting, just let us know and we can record that in the minutes at that point in the agenda. I don't have any urgent business from you, so we'll move. The next one is public participation, and we don't have any public participants here.
No registered speakers.
No registered speakers for this evening. So up to item 7, External Auditors Audit Completion Report 23-24. So online we're joined by Alex Walling and Neil Hollis from Bishop Fleming. So I was going to go, I don't know which of you, Alex, going to start. If you could just introduce your report and so if you want to sort of introduce, make any sort of comments you'd like to make about the report, and then I can always go to Simon as well if there's anything to add from council perspective. But yeah, over to you.
I'm going to hand straight over to Neil if that's okay. Neil's going to do this first report and I'll do the second report if that's okay.
Brilliant, thank you very much.
Excuse me. Thank you, Chair. I'm not planning on going through the reports in detail, but I'm happy to take any questions afterwards. The content of reports for the two councils is pretty much the same, so I'll just go through it as one and let you know if there are any areas where the point is unique to either South or Vale. The headlines from these are that we're disclaiming our audit opinion for 22, 23, 24. This is primarily due to the fact that the prior year accounts were not audited, and we could therefore place no reliance on the opening balances. In addition, due to EY only signing off the 22-23 opinion on the 9th of December, we have not had time to complete work on all areas of the accounts in advance of Friday's backstop date. We have given more detail on this in section 2 of our report. In terms of taking these areas forward, we are aiming to do a more normal audit next year, and we'll be looking to build back assurance on as many of these areas as possible. but there are some items such as reserves for which this will be difficult. We have had and will continue to have had discussions with management regarding this process, and Alex is also involved in discussions with regulators and colleagues at other firms on a national level. Also on page 5 is a list of the areas which we've detailed as we're still finalising our work on. The version of the report that was sent out to yourselves was draft, and these have moved on from the point of this version of it. We have only our sort of finalisation points remaining on that. Below this section in the report, we have some commentary on the audit and accounts processes, for which there were no significant issues identified. Also in the report, with sections on our audit risks and our responses to these, audit and financial reporting matters, and audit adjustments. All adjustments identified above our reporting threshold have been amended for. In section 7, we've included some management letter points. All of these have been given our lowest risk ranking, other than an issue which was concluded after we have issued a draft of this report, and so you won't have sight of this. This relates to an issue around income identified at Vale, which should have been included in the prior year. We've given this an amber rating, as the value involved was 444,000, so above our bottom threshold, but still not material. Since we issued a draft report, management have provided responses to all of these points, and we will add these in before issuing our final report. The last bit of the report I'll draw your attention to is the audit fee in section 8. In this, we have detailed the PSAA scale fee, plus any fees for additional work, which are agreed then by PSAA. We still have a TBC in there for additional work with regards to developing and undertaking an approach with previously disclaimed audit opinions. We anticipate this fee will be approximately 7,000, but as with the other elements, this will be agreed with PSAA. And lastly, I would just like to pass on our thanks to Simon, Richard, and the team for all the help this year. The situation is a new and challenging one, and we appreciate their help in managing to get things done as best we can, especially with regards to the tight turnaround time between EY's opinion and now. I'm looking forward to working with them going forward and hopefully getting back to something that resembles a normal audit in the future. Thank you.
You know,
Is there any questions? Sorry.
Do you want to add anything, Simon, before I open it up?
I was just going to comment that, I mean, obviously, I think what you're saying, Neil, is that the report in front of the members tonight is drafting, you'll issue a final one. So just procedurally, from our perspective, I wonder if it's worth agreeing that the committee delegates to me and myself in consultation with the chairs to be satisfied that that final report is, that the chairs are okay with that final report. That's probably more for us than you, Neil, to be fair. I'm just checking that that's the process you're going to follow. You'll issue a final version of the draft here. I think if that comes to me, we'll circulate it to all members, but we'll do a delegation for me to consult with the chairs on getting that agreed.
Providing that's not a material difference.
Yeah, provided that. If you could actually perhaps comment when you circulate your final version, Neil and Alex, that there's no material difference to the one you circulated that was shared with committee, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. I think the main difference is that additional recommendation with regards to the income, and which I think we've discussed, Simon. Other than that, it is generally just amending it to reflect the fact that it's complete, rather than at this point it is just draft with work outstanding.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so open up to questions or comments from committee. That's Dragonetti.
Yes, on page 17 of our report, you refer to the expenditure and funding analysis. That there's a sort of there wasn't a clear trail between the net expenditure chargeable to general fund balance and what is reported in the management in outturn reports. Then you add, this was difficult to reconcile. That sort of sounds a bit concerning, or perhaps it's not concerning. Perhaps you could amplify a bit.
Yeah, I think it's more of a documentation and procedural type thing rather than anything that is a significant issue, which is why we've given it our sort of low green ranking on the recommendation. I think what we'd like to see is just a clearer and more obvious trail between the outturn reported and what's in that column in the expenditure and funding analysis.
Anything, Simon?
No, I think that's the team. The team are going to work on that for the future. I think there's anything fundamentally wrong with understanding. I think it is more presentational.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Fowler.
Thank you very much through the chair. Thanks, Neil. You commented at the start of your report, for reasons we fully understand why you're unable to give a full audit certificate this year. Now, next year, of course, could possibly be the final year that these councils exist. And therefore, bearing in mind that we'll be amalgamating with another council probably, will you be able to certify the closing balances next year, do you think, so that will ease the transition into the new council arrangements?
Shall I pick this one up, Neil? Or
Yeah, absolutely. Alex,
yeah. I mean, I think it would be fair to say that the very simple answer to your question is no, we won't, because to actually get out of a disclaimed opinion is going to take several years. Even in a corporate entity, it could take 2 or 3 years to get out of, well, if you've got issues over the opening balances, to resolve that. I think Neil mentioned that I'm sitting on various national groups where we're looking at how we get out of disclaimed opinions. And I think it's fair to say, because of the complexity of local government reports, audits, and also particularly around their reserves, getting out of disclaimed opinions might take considerably longer than MHCLG are hoping, because obviously, as I say, because of the reserves, you've got earmarked reserves, you've got the general fund reserves, you've got unusable reserves. So actually unpin that and do look at those is actually going to take quite a long time to actually sort out. I completely understand where you're coming from, because I think this is with Devo and reorganisation, I think that adds another layer of complexity, and I'm not sure that necessarily somebody's actually joined the dots at the moment, because yeah, you're absolutely right. In an ideal world, all the audit opinions would be given, and it would make actually, when you're amalgamating authorities, an awful lot simpler. That isn't going to be the case, and it's not just for yourself, but I think it's nationally, it's going to be quite a considerable issue, and presumably somebody's going to have to try and find a way forward for all the local authorities that are in this situation.
Through the chair, Alex, thank you very much. Your answer is disappointing but not surprising, I suppose, is probably the best way of putting it. I suppose one way to make everything easier would be to make local government accounts less complex. As you said, the complexity, which I think, as a layman, is a very large proportion of the problem.
Anybody else have any questions or comments? No. There we go. In which case, so this item is to consider the report, which we've done. And so, but we want to delegate the sort of final signing off of the report to Simon in consultation with the co-chairs, unless there is a material change from the drafts before us,
As advised by
Bishop Planning. Is that okay?
Yeah, I'll second that.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, and do we need to do this separately, or?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
So
council.
okay, so Mocky, do you want to do South first?
The proposal, as already mentioned, I will propose that. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Dragonetti. All in favour from the south side? That's approved. Thank you.
Thank you. And the same recommendation I'd like to propose for the Vale. Councillor Ford is seconding. Is everybody in favour of that from the Vale side? Thank you very much. Right, great. So that's everything on that item. Thank you very much. I know that you've got colleagues from Bishop Planning joining us for another item later on, aren't you? But thank you very much for the meantime. And then we'll move on to number 8, which is the letters of representation to the external auditor. So Simon, can I ask you to just introduce the item, please?
Thank you. So as part of signing off the statements of accounts, the councils are required to write to the auditors to make a number of representations and statements regarding the accounts and the information behind those. The format of the letter is provided by the auditor to their requirements. what is in your pack is a draft letter based on their requirements back to them, and the item is seeking the committee's approval to approve these letters and to agree that myself and the relevant co-chair can sign them and send them back. Now, as with the previous item, I'm not expecting that these letters will change given that what's just been discussed, but clearly if there was any change required to the letter from the late findings from the audit, we'd have to take a different approach. But on this occasion, I expect that I think you can agree to the letters being signed, but again, perhaps with a delegation to me in consultation with the co-chairs to manage any minor changes.
Right, does anyone have any comments or questions about the letters? In that case, so this is signed off by the chair, isn't it, of each of the committee for each respective council. So what we're voting on is basically to ask for permission for the letters to be signed as written, unless there's a material change, which would be just delegated to Simon and the relevant co-chair to agree. But other than that, I'd like to propose that I'm able to sign the letter for the Vale side with that context. That probably wasn't very coherent sentences.
I think it's all the same conditions as on the last visit.
Basically, yes.
On that 85 seconds.
So is everyone from the Vale side happy? We sign it on. Brilliant. Okie doke. And then.
Okay. I propose that we accept this letter in its current form for approval, subject to any minor changes going forwards, which will be delegated to the head of finance and the co-chair. So on that basis, I propose that. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Dragonetti, all in favour? That's unanimous and that's passed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. So we're on to number 9, statement of accounts. So back to you, Simon.
Thank you. So what's in front of you in item 9 is what was the latest draft set of accounts for both councils. These are the accounts that included all the changes advised by the auditors up to the point of publication. So again, there may well be minor changes to these before signing off. But they, as they stand at the moment, they reflect all of the changes. And the late point that Neil raised isn't actually a change to this set of accounts. It's a reflection that they include monies erroneously from a previous year. So actually, the money should have been in the previous year, but it's not. It's in this one. So again, as with the previous item, these will be disclaimed. Modified disclaimed opinion on these accounts. So it's an improvement from where we were with the last set of accounts, where the whole works were disclaimed. There has obviously been more work done on these accounts, but not enough, as you heard earlier on, to get an unqualified opinion on both sets of accounts. So again, as with the previous 2 items, it's a subject to recommendation on this one, which I think is to recommend. Again, it's for me and the chair to sign relevant parts of the statement and then approve them for publication. That will be subject to any late amendments delegated to me in consultation with the co-chairs to agree.
I'm just going to ask a quick question for the benefit of the thousands of people who are watching us and watching us on YouTube. Us being disclaimed accounts, and they're given, Bishop Clement given that. What does that mean for this council and this committee going forwards? Because obviously none of us have discussed that yet.
So where we are, so as I said, to clarify from where we were before. So we've had fully unqualified opinions on all the accounts up to and including 21-22. 22-23, we had the fully disclaimed opinion. On this set of accounts, we've had a modified disclaimed opinion. Now, in reality, what you're always striving for with a set of accounts is an unqualified opinion.
Yes, of course.
The reality is, though, is that certainly for 22-23 and the same for 23-24, the majority of councils will have a disclaimed or modified disclaimed opinion. What does that actually mean? Well, what it means is that the auditors are not signing off that they are truly happy with the numbers in the accounts. I'm not saying they're unhappy with them. They're just not saying they've done enough work to be happy with them, if that makes sense. Now, on one hand, from my position, I look at it and think, well, we're all in the same boat as council, so it's unfortunate that it's where we are. On the other hand, it is really frustrating, and it's nothing against Bishop Fleming or EY before them, but we've got ourselves into a situation where we are unable to get the accounts audited because nationally we're in a mess. So I think that the problem it's actually almost relatively straightforward for this committee in terms of what's in front of them tonight, because there's actually a very straightforward decision here, in my opinion, to sign these accounts off, compared to potentially if you had a full audit, there could be all sorts of things coming out of it, and you could have a useful debate. I think the challenge for the committee is it has to take almost at face value that these accounts are correct to the best of everyone's knowledge and ability. You don't have that assurance, and I think as was alluded to earlier on, it's going to take time to sort this mess out, and this mess might not be sorted out before we cease to be.
That leads me on to our next question. I know we're talking about the future, but obviously there's going to be election, there's going to be a shadow authority, etc., etc. Well, what happens then if it's not being qualified?
I think as Alex from Bishop Fleming said earlier on, I don't think anyone in government's necessarily join those dots up. I think bringing together unitary accounts is bad enough when they've all been signed off and agreed. I think it's going to be really challenging to bring together accounts for a new unitary when they're all potentially in different stages. So we don't know who we'll end up with as partners, and I don't know what the status of all their individual audits are. But we were in many ways ahead of the game, at least getting our 21-22 accounts signed off with a full and qualified audit opinion. Lots of councils didn't just have the 22-23 accounts disclaimed earlier or last year. They had several years' worth of accounts disclaimed, which means that Bishop Fleming's job on our accounts is going to be difficult, but it's not as difficult as if they had to go back 5 or 6 years. Now, if you're trying to do that, again, I don't know what the status of clearly I don't know what the future looks like, so I don't know what the status of the councils we will merge with accounts is, but it could be that they're all starting from different positions of assurance as well. So I think it's going to be very challenging, I think, for whoever audits the new unitaries to audit those first few years of those accounts.
Yeah, Councillor Bullock.
I think I'm probably repeating what Simon's saying here, but that we may think that these councils are under good financial control, and all the evidence seems to be that that's the case. The fact that we've had the recent proper audited accounts, properly certificated audited accounts, is additional evidence to that. The problem is when we go into the merger, of course, you never know what's happening elsewhere. And I mean, I don't know whether with Birmingham, which of course has entered into financial chaos, I don't know whether those accounts were originally signed off or not by the auditors, but actually things come out of the woodwork later, which has caused the problems. So I think as far as accountancy is concerned, we're entering a very difficult and unknown financial circumstance, and you just don't know what you're going to get, especially when you haven't got audit accounts with a proper certificate on them.
Yeah, I mean, along the same theme, can appreciate the reasons for the difficulties, but is there a project plan with timeline, deliverables, and all the rest of it that you have, knowing full well that it may not be achievable because of a number of things, but at least if you've got a plan, you've then got a way of saying, well, this bit hasn't worked, or we need to chase this bit up, and this is our respect, etc. I just wonder, is there any, in my mind, that's a nice visual way of demonstrating it, and with a timeline and everything.
Yeah. Yeah, Alex, you might be able to help us with that question as well about the sort of project plan timeline for getting to a point where we can sign off the accounts.
So the theory is that obviously you have a disclaimed opinion for maybe 1 or 2 years, and then the next year, hopefully, you'll get a qualified. I say hopefully, nobody wants a qualified opinion. You get a qualified opinion because perhaps, I don't know, 80% of the work's done, but there may be 1 or 2 areas which we cannot give an opinion on, and then hopefully within the next year it'll be a clean opinion. I think there's a SITFA document on this. I'll try and dig it out and send it through, and it might be helpful for you going forward. I think the difficulty is, I think that's the theory, and that would work, as I say, for a corporate entity. But because of the complexity, and all the firms are battling with this, we're trying to work together, but we're battling with this because of the sheer complexity, as I say, of local government accounts, and particularly if you've got an HRA, which I know you haven't got, but if you've got an HRA or you've got group accounts, or it becomes even more complicated. But it's that reserves issue. It's the usable and the unusable reserves. I'm not a corporate auditor, so I might be talking rubbish here, but I don't think you get that in corporate accounts, but you do in local government. You don't get it in the NHS either. You just get it in local government, and because it's unique to that, as I say, I don't think anybody's ever needed to unpick it and try and work out how you get forward. So I think we, as auditors, we would all like there to be a project plan and a view as to when we would get out of disclaimed opinions, because obviously it's not ideal. I've done local government audit for 30 odd years, never been in this situation before. It's completely new to me and to many of my colleagues. It's not where we want to be. None of us, it's very uncomfortable giving a disclaimed opinion. We would like to try and move forward, but I think we're all struggling as to how that is actually going to happen, and whether there probably needs to be potentially some form of intervention at a national level to try and sort this out, because otherwise I'm not sure that we're going to find a way forward that works for individual audit firms and for our regulators. And I think that's the difficulty that we're facing at the moment. So I'd love to be able to say there's a 3 or 4 year plan. This is what's going to actually happen. But I think at this stage that's possibly a little bit optimistic. I know that's probably, again, not the answer that you were hoping for.
Yeah, and I'm not for 1 minute saying because you've got a plan it would be executed in the timeline planned, but the complexities you're talking about, it just sounds like, oh, all these complexities, whereas if they are actually broken down and identified, I mean, it's how to eat an elephant. They're broken down and identified, then you know who's tackling them. Without any plan at all, just seems to be,
Sorry, Chair, can I just come back on one? I think that is a fair point, because and as an audit firm, obviously we have been working through how we can try and get out of a disclaimed opinion. I think there are some areas, leaving aside the reserves, because that is the real killer, if I'm being honest. The rest of it, I think we can start to work through. And I know Neil and I would be keen to work with Simon and the finance team next year. To actually kind of start some of the areas that we haven't been able to get the assurance on. Maybe we can start rebuilding the assurance in those particular areas. It's probably, as I say, the reserves bit that we will need a national steer on. But Neil and I, after the dust has settled this week, I think Neil and I will sit down and come up with a project plan, and then talk to the finance team as to how we can start trying to get that assurance. We won't do it all in year 1. But obviously, if we've got a plan and we all know what we're working to, I think that will be helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Simon, do you want to come in then?
I was just going to comment. I mean, I think you've probably heard me say before on this committee, the way to really solve this problem is to deal with the complexity of the accounts in the first place. I think that's the challenge. It is the accounts as presented are too complex. The people won't read them. They don't understand them beyond the explanatory the narrative statement bit. The accountants understand them, but that's because they have to. But they don't. They understand them in that context. But what does it actually mean? It's not clear. I think without sorting that out, this problem won't. think that's the challenge going forward.
Councillor Rawlings, do you want to come in, or you just
Firstly, apologies for being late.
letting us know?
Yeah, there has to be a point at which we know in the past where we did have balances that we accepted, and then we've had some movements in between potentially, but there has to be a point, doesn't there, where you say, well, you know, a couple of years have gone by now, nothing has jumped out and waved its arms at us. We had an understanding of where it was. We understood the transactions in the year. What reasonable basis is there for saying that we should disclaim our closing balances? I think there comes to a point where you just have to say, look, that's the stake in the sand, and we go with that. I did also have a small other question, which I'm surprised I haven't come across before, but there's a deferred capital receipts reserve that is referred to, and it's 25 billion quid, and it allegedly or apparently is things we've sold for which cash settlement hasn't taken place. And I couldn't, this is SODC, but I couldn't immediately think, what actually is that?
The obvious one is the loan to SOHO. That, because that's effectively that was a capital transaction.
Yes.
So effectively, it was because it was a capital transaction. If you like, if you think of the balance sheet, so apologies to the non-accountant. If you think of the balance sheet, you've got the loan in the top half of the balance sheet as a long-term investment. The contra in the bottom half of the balance sheet is deferred capital receipts.
Okay.
And that's at least 15 million of that number.
Yes.
I must admit, I can't remember that number being that high, but
that was what I was thinking.
It's been a while since I looked at the account.
It's not a reval reserve. It's not. It is literally what it says, I guess.
I think there is. There are other things of that ilk. Some of the leases, for example, where we've done a long-term lease that's a disposal. Clearly, that comes back as a deferred capital receipt in time. The critical thing is there'll be a contra up in long-term investments, so it will balance.
Sure, no, it has to balance.
Yeah, it's obvious, isn't it? But yeah, it again, in some respects, to the layman, that amount of deferred capital receipts doesn't seem realistic, but actually, we have to account for them that way to comply with the code. So
Maybe we should just enhance the note a bit, but yeah,
we can take that away.
Did you put your list?
Yeah, so I was saying that Simon, we have a balance sheet and we have the assets and liabilities, which we all know those are all correct, aren't they?
Yeah.
So all the sort of allocating between different types of reserve is merely a paper exercise, isn't it? And you could, if the government wishes, just put a line through it to say, right, you've got untriggered reserve, and that's it.
I think that the challenge with that would be, and again, Alex might want to chip in as well. I think the challenge with that would be is the reserves are, first of all, they're the most politically contentious part of the accounts in terms of how much money a council's got left in terms of usable reserves.
Yeah.
So and I'm not suggesting this happens here, but there is a potential to manipulate reserves to make your financial position look better.
But your financial position is, the net assets are there, aren't they?
Well, I was going to come back to the other bit that, if you like, and this is where the complexity is that really frustrates me, is in things like the valuation of pensions liability, the valuation of fixed assets, the valuation of some of the financial instruments we have, and they're all in reserves as well. And that's where you get into, well, our estimation or our valuation assumes this, and the auditor has to follow their process and challenge and come up with a potentially different view. So on the top half of the balance sheet, you've got our view of what our assets are valued that have to be tested. But it's the other side of that at the bottom that's the problem. So I think because I've been in a situation before where the top half of the balance sheet you can tick off quite happily, but you could actually end up with a very different presentation of the bottom half of the balance sheet depending on the assumptions you make.
So what you're calling non-usable reserves are really liabilities, are they?
They're the other side, if you like, they're almost the financing side of the assets, that you hold, but it's how you finance them is where it's tricky, and it's not so tricky for our council, particularly because we don't borrow.
Yeah.
But if you're a borrowing authority, I mean, which we will be going forward, but based on our budgets, the borrowing liability ends up in that mix as well, and that's where lots of councils have come unstuck.
Right.
With lots of councils have made assumptions about borrowing that have proved inadequate, or they had to change, and that's when they've got themselves into financial difficulty. So that's why I think it's very difficult for the audit. I think the auditor, in theory, it sounds really straightforward, doesn't it? So signing off the reserves, but I think they've got, first of all, the possibility of the reserves being made to look better than they are to deal with.
Because you're hiding liabilities.
Because you're potentially hiding liabilities, and actually, the reserves the reserves have the potential to hide where the bad news stories for a council.
Yes.
So that's why it's really tricky for them to unpick the reserves. I don't know, Alex, whether you want to come in on that or not, because I'm sort of guessing. I'm trying to say what I think the problems are, but you may have your own view.
Yeah, I think for a lot of us auditors, the issue is that business of the usable reserves and the unusable reserves, and obviously the accounts are complicated because of that. As I say, most entities just have usable reserves, so whatever sits in the reserves is usually cash backed, and therefore you can use the money. It's money that's available to you as a council to use. The issue with local authorities is you have that, both the usable and the unusable, and obviously transactions, some of them may go into the usable pot and some of them might go, the other side of it might go into the unusable pot, and it's that allocation that's the critical thing for us as auditors, to make sure that, because obviously, if you put it all in your general fund, in your usable pot, as it were, that does make your bottom line, look much more healthy. And, council taxpayers will be thinking, gosh, we've got lots of money that we could actually spend, but actually you haven't, because it's not real, as it were. So, and that comes back to, sorry, I was just going to say that it comes back to what Simon was saying about the complexity of the accounts. And I think they've got more and more complex over the years. And Simon very graciously said that probably finance people understand them. I'm going to be honest, there are times when I don't know. Actually, I have to really think about how something flows through the accounts, because it is so complicated.
Okay. If I think of unusable reserves as really being on the top of the balance sheet as liabilities, it's could be easier to understand as a concept, isn't it? Because all we have is our usable reserves, which is our profits, accumulated profits, basically. Yeah.
And a lot of that is driven by the fact that the regulation determines what you can and cannot charge to the general fund.
Mm-hmm.
And the obvious example is depreciation, for example. So there is a depreciation charge in the accounts, but it cannot by law hit usable reserves. So it has to hit unusable reserves.
Okay. So change the law, I think. Anyway.
Not
this evening.
Not tonight, no.
Okay,
Thank you, and thanks Alex for chipping in with that one. Councillor Ford.
Yeah, first of all, it's my apology time actually, because my carefully calibrated notes are on my desk at home, so I haven't got the references that I would have, or even probably most of the points. But when looking at the accounts, I picked up that the net worth of the Vale, has increased by somewhere between, I think, £2 and £3 million, and that is actually from a balance sheet gain on the pension fund of 7.7 million, less a 5 million loss on revaluation of assets. Now, obviously, these are balance sheet movements, and it goes again to reserves. But I was wondering if there's any way of monetizing the increase of the saving in the amount of pension fund that is actually required.
The trouble with, what you've just sort of really hit the nail on the head on is you've got the two big things that have caused the movement in the accounts there are a valuation of assets, well, that's subjective on the day you do it, and a valuation of pension liabilities, which is also subjective on the day you do it. Now, in reality, the way that the pension fund works is they do a triennial valuation of the pension fund, and that is used to then determine employee and employer contribution rates employer contribution rates, because employee fixed in the contract. They used to determine employer contribution rates. So ultimately, yes, the way the pension fund is performing through that analysis of performance will change for positive or negative what the employer bail in this instance will pay as part of their salary budget. But I think it's just to establish in terms of what's really important to the council, to the committee, would be what actual money have we got in the pot that we've got. And actually, as you've identified, the two biggest changes in the balance sheet are subjective investment decisions, subjective views on the value of our investments, albeit different investments at a point in time. That, historically, auditors and accountants have spent a lot of time arguing over what is the correct value of these transactions.
Oh, that's true. I mean, I didn't really want to speak about valuation of the fixed assets. I was really just concentrating here on the pension fund, mainly because it gives us good news. But obviously, in the private sector, if there's an overfunding of pension fund, and that's owing to the amount of money the company's put into the pension fund, there are ways and means by which the company can actually remove that money, as I understand it. But is that not the case?
What would take the money out?
Well, what you could do is reduce the amount of money you're putting in.
Yeah, and in fact, members of South, I'm not sure any of the members of South were here when South has actually made that decision in the past. So South actually put additional money into the fund to reduce its pension fund. And actually the conversation we had at the last valuation was whether South could make any further contribution. The answer we got back was there's no point, because you're actually at full valuation, you can't have it back. So we didn't make that decision.
So if you get a benefit, it will be spread over a large amount of time.
Yeah.
Well, it will help with that borrowing in due course, Simon, which I know you're so worried about. Thank you very much.
Any other questions on the statement of accounts?
The easy one on your investment properties. Last year they went up from 8 million. You increased to increased the value of 549,000 in the fair value. This year that seems to have been reversed, gone down by 504,000. Has there been any underlying change in the this is on page 7, page 33.
I'm getting there slowly.
Okay. It's a fair value. Somebody's
I've got it. So it's taking it back to sort of where it started, really, hasn't it? I don't know whether Richard's on the call. He might know the details. I mean, what I do know is we have to change the value. We have to consider the fair value of investment properties every year, whereas with other properties we have to do them on a cycle. But the investment properties are done every year. I don't know whether, Richard, if you're on the call, do you have any more detail? The simple answer is it's what the valuers told us, I imagine.
Yeah. Hi. Good evening, everyone. Not off the top of my head, Simon. I can find out.
It doesn't matter, I'm sure.
Yeah. It will be. Well, you could probably confirm, Richard. I mean, we do get these valued every year, don't we? And I think they also go through our property team. The property team validates the valuations, if that makes sense. So we don't just take them at face value when we get them. So hopefully that's some assurance.
The figures were heavily checked by property. I can't remember what the trend was. That's not a massive movement, actually. 500,000 year on year.
Not for the value of the assets, no. But it would. The assurance we can give.
It's not too bad when it goes up like that and then down again. I mean, it's sort of
bit
of a Grand Old Duke of York, isn't it?
Maybe it's it's almost a summary of our economy as it stands at the moment. So,
okay.
Thank you, Richard.
Thanks, Richard.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I think we're ready to go to recommendations, and again, this needs to be separate South and Vale votes. But I've got to remind myself now of the recommendation, because on our papers it's to receive and approve the statement of accounts, but obviously with that disclaimer again, sort of subject to any non-material changes to be agreed with Simon. So now I will propose that we accept the accounts for Vale, subject to any non-material changes to be approved by Simon.
Seconded.
That's 40 to second. Is everybody from Vale in favour? That's unanimous. Okay.
I propose the same proposal, but instead of saying Bell, South. All in favour? Thank you. Oh, yes, we did. We had councillor Dragonetti.
Thank you. Brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so next one is annual governance statements, which is also Simon.
So the good thing with this one is there won't be any subject to with this one, because you can agree this one hopefully tonight. And you can, it's to receive and approve, and obviously this is then signed by the leaders and by Mark Stone as chief executive. So the annual governance statement forms part of the accounts, and it explains how the council has complied with the Code of Corporate Governance, how it met the requirements of regulations, the council and audit regulations in relation to an annual review of the effectiveness of the council systems of internal control and preparation and approval of the statement of accounts. So it's had a bit of a revamp this year as a document, which you probably noticed it's been brought up to. It takes into account all the latest guidance. I think it's a very good document now. It's a lot more improved. There are some issues and improvements towards the end of the document, but yeah, this needs to be approved as part of the accounts.
Anyone have any questions or comments on government statement? Don't see anybody indicating, so we'll need separate votes for this, won't we? Yeah. So I'll propose that for the Vale half that we approve the annual governance statement for Vale. That's the board for seconds. Everyone from Vale happy with that? That's Roberts, you're happy? Yes, good. I
propose that we, South councillors, approve the annual governance statements of 23-24 as stated in our report. I'll propose as web seconder. Who's seconding?
I'll second.
Okay, councillor Rawlings, all in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. That's passed.
Thank you. Okay, so now we're going on to item 11, the external auditors audit results report. So Alec, and I think you said you were going to lead on this one, but Neil's there as well.
Yeah. I'll lead on it, but if you ask any tricky questions, I might hand over to Neil. So the auditor's annual report that you've got two in front of you, you will see that they are very, very similar. Basically, the auditor's annual report is the report that's produced at the end of the audit when everything is done, and it brings everything together. But principally, it covers the VFM commentary. So the three areas that we're required to look at under the NEO code: financial sustainability, governance, and the 3 E's: economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. This report is marked as draft. The reason it's marked as draft is because I can't finalise it until I've given the opinion. So once I've given the opinion, which hopefully will be either tomorrow or Thursday, I will then finalise this report. And basically all I need to do then is just slot in that I've given a disclaimed opinion and the date that I've given it on. The fundamentals in the report won't actually change. Generally, I would say this is a good report in terms of the VFM side of things. We haven't identified any significant weaknesses that we need to bring your attention. I wasn't going to go through all of the detail that's actually in there because hopefully you've had a chance to look at it, and if you've got any questions. I was just going to skip straight to the recommendations, which are on page 18 of the main agenda. And I think there are 3 that we've raised this year, and I think there were a few that were outstanding from the previous year. The first was around financial sustainability and financial savings plans. So we just made a recommendation about the council considering whether a more formal savings plan might be appropriate in the future. I appreciate that actually both South and Vale are quite healthy from a financial perspective. I know it's all relative, you may not feel that, but actually I think compared with a lot of local authorities, you're in probably a better position than others are, and perhaps have not needed to go down the route of having a formal savings plan that you're monitoring, and you can actually look out year on year and that sort of thing. The second one was around governance and internal audit recommendations. And we just felt that the number of recommendations that was outstanding seemed to be, going to be honest, seemed quite high. So we just felt it was probably an area of focus. And I'm aware from talking to Simon and other people that obviously you are already aware that this is an area that more work needs to be done and more scrutiny at each of the meetings in terms of getting those number of internal audit recommendations down. The problem is, obviously, if you've got an awful lot, there's quite a lot for people to actually address, but also over time they become invalid because the systems have moved on and things like that. And the final the area that we've made a recommendation around was around benchmarking, and that was just perhaps having a more formal approach to the benchmarking. We're aware there is some benchmarking that goes on within the councils, but it's having that more formalised approach to that to actually not just demonstrate to you, but also the taxpayers that actually the services you're providing are, providing economy, efficiency and effectiveness, and also just seeking to improve performance over time. So those are the three recommendations that we've made. I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Alex. Councillor Carr?
My question is actually to Simon, because benchmarking is quite important, because as you said, Alex, we looking at our figures is really depending on how we compare ourselves to others, whether we feel like we're doing well or not. So benchmarking that has been highlighted is, to me, a little bit concerning, because we need to know how we compare with others. So what are you and your team doing to make sure that this doesn't come again? Because we need to make sure we shouldn't just look at our accounts and how the councils run in isolation. We should compare against others. So what are the plans going forwards? So
I think when this recommendation was first raised, what struck me is I know I do benchmarking. So for example, we get analysis of how our costs compare to other councils in that are statistically similar to us or English average. And I look at that, when I'm looking at budget setting and forming my own views on where the council is and so on. I think the challenge with that is I'm doing that in isolation, and other members of staff are doing it in their own area in isolation. I think what's missing across the council is almost bringing that together and having a corporate-wide health check using benchmark in terms of what we're doing. So I suppose I'm probably, from not knowing what goes on, I'm probably less concerned than you are, Mocky. I think from your perspective, though, you don't see any of that. So, and again, if I use my example, there's nothing in the budget report we've just done, which is, something for me to think about going forward, that says I have looked at the costs of the council compared to other councils, and we're good in this area, got work to do here, but overall it's basically okay, because that's what the benchmarking said. But I'm very mindful I haven't actually told you that. There's a budget setting report. So I think that's something for us to consider as officers is actually bringing that out more and bringing it to your attention. But I think the assurance I can give you is it does go on. It just goes on. It just goes on in individual areas with no overall coordination, which is I think what we want to address. Does that help?
It will certainly help when you put a report to say I've looked at this or compared this going forward. So I think that will help going forwards. So thank you.
Yeah. Councillor Rawlings?
Yeah, I don't object to the report itself because I think it's fine in its own terms and when it's written. In my view, it's out of date. It's out of date because of the local government reorganisation, and we have to look at everything with fresh eyes in that context. In my view, doing in-depth benchmarking, for example, is a resource-hungry activity, and I would say there's still merit, perhaps, in, say, some huge areas like planning or something, and there are other areas where, frankly, in this circumstances, it just doesn't make sense because this structure and this operation is not going to exist in its present form, whatever the answer might be. So there are limits to how far we should go on with that. If I look at the internal audit things, I think we feel from our past discussions that the internal audit function is actually highly effective, and the fact that it's thrown up a lot of recommendations shouldn't per se be thrown back in its face, because actually they are good to follow through. There have been some things which we know and we've inquired about that have taken a while to resolve, related to things like the recovery of functions from capita and some health and safety issues and documentation issues that have underlain that, and which we've had to work through. And certainly, health and safety stuff is important. So yes, we should knock those over. But I'm not sure if we should beat ourselves up too badly about those audit recommendations, because I think they've been done in the right context and that they're appropriate. So I'm just really going, we're going on to formalised savings plans and all the rest of it. I think we've got to just take a pragmatic view of where we are in the changed circumstances.
Yeah.
Thank you. So there's a couple of points on the last point. I mean, I think that's the conversation I had with Alex. Is that if we had if we just brought forward budget to add a £5 million savings target in next year, absolutely we would have to be. There'd have to be a plan. There'd have to be a structure to where those savings are going to come from, a reporting plan. Where we're going to report back on progress against those. So that'd be fundamental. What our budgets actually have in is, if you like, a 100,000 continuous improvement plan. Now, by definition, that doesn't need a formal savings plan. Either A, in terms of where we're expecting to find the savings, and B, the quantum of them. But clearly, if LGR wasn't happening, which we all know it is, but if it wasn't happening, certainly I think we would enter a situation 2 or 3 years' time. We would need to have that sort of plan, and we would have to go forward. I think on the benchmarking point, I think what's actually there's a nuance here, because I think once we know who we're going to pair off with, I think we will need to do some benchmarking with them. In terms of how we operate. And I'm already starting to think through, what from a finance perspective, how do we perform on X, Y, and Z? Because when we start working with, when we start bringing these councils together and they do different things, well, the benchmark, what we have to do is work out who's doing the best here and take that forward. So I think maybe benchmarking is not the right term for that, but I think the need to compare us, not necessarily compare ourselves with others, but establish how we're doing compared to those we're going to be joining up with is a definite.
We know from the past, analysis of One Oxfordshire and all that stuff, they found it damned hard to find savings out of Southern Vale, because actually by operating jointly in so many ways and with shared officer base, it actually was shown to be efficient and there wasn't much fat they could squeeze out. I think that's also should inform our thinking. Obviously, we always have to aspire to more, but we've got to be in a sensible time frame.
So, Councillor Roberts and affordability now.
Yes, following on for the benchmarking. I mean, we have over the past got reports, haven't we, about value for money for services across the whole thing. If I remember right, we had to buy those in, though. They didn't come for freebies.
No, we subscribe to a service that does those.
Yes.
We do get those and we do look at them. As I said, but it is done. We haven't, in all the time I've been here, we've never actually sort of published in a report, this is how we, part of the budget setting report, this is how we compare.
Yeah.
So I think that's the step change we need to make.
But I was going to say, with the follow-on conversation to devolution, I think that actually we really need to do that at this point in time more than perhaps we ever have before. And I would also suggest particular in the financial area, because we know that there are things in unitaries called high demand, which are not on the accounts. So they're a level of money that has been spent but it doesn't come through on the accounts. It doesn't show. So that for me, and I actually went through a few different councils to see what their high needs block actually said. Some councils produce that publicly, some councils don't. Some councils don't do it every year. So actually, that's really going to be quite difficult. And if we are going in with other councils, if they've got a minus 22 million sat on their accounts that doesn't actually show, that's quite important to know when you're going into devolution.
Government inspired off balance sheet.
It's in millions. It's not little money. Yes, everybody has for years said that the government will find a solution. Well, they haven't yet. And they don't show any sign of writing it off, which is also very worrying, because they suddenly turn around and say, right, now we've reorganised you into a much more efficient unit. You have to clear that debt yourself, which I can see coming down the road. So I think I was suggesting that maybe at this point in time, I know we haven't had final audits signed off, but we really do need to look at and buy in that information, because for two reasons. One, to find out how our services compare with others and which bits are the best going forward as good practice, but also that financial picture of what we're going in for and where the debts actually are, and whether they're government debts that they've asked to, or whether they're 114s or Highness block. There's a lot in that package that I think needs unpicking. So yes, I think if you don't have that information before or as the evolution's coming down the line, we're all going to be in some big shocks. So to avoid that, I think we know roughly where our partners are, but perhaps we should be looking and delving into their backgrounds now.
I think that, that's an interesting point, that benchmarking point, because obviously we made the point, Simon, that benchmarking is happening across the council. It's not necessarily all in one place and recorded in the financial statements. But I think the points that Councillor was just making then about understanding that benchmarking, financial but also otherwise, and understanding the different councils. Well, proposals are being put together about what would be a good arrangement for clustering councils into unitaries. It seems like it is quite timely to look at that. And we have like our data hub, which has got quite a lot of stuff on it that's publicly available. I know that not all councils have it in that format in one place, but you'll be able to find out a lot of that information. And I was just thinking whether that's some sort of recommendation to Cabinet actually, in terms of considering financial benchmarking and other benchmarking that's already happening, and how that could be used to inform the discussions and thinking already around LGR and devolution.
The only slight issue there might be, Chair, that it's easy to see the price. It is harder perhaps to see the quality. That's another dimension.
Yeah, so not just, I didn't just mean financial,
I know,
but the sort of, I mean, I'm sure it is.
Yeah.
being looked at actually, to be honest. But I'm just wondering whether
it's just how public would that information be available. I mean, clearly officers need to know it. How public is that information going to be made available by the time decisions are going to be made?
I mean, I think the one thing probably to reflect on is that ultimately the decision maker on the future unitaries will be the government.
Yes.
So it's not clear to me what criteria they will use to make those decisions. I mean, they've issued some criteria. The sort of things we're talking about here, I'm not entirely sure are going to influence what decisions they make going forward, to be fair.
Yeah.
But, it is a fair observation, I think, that we need to be, and to be fair, I think it's happening. It doesn't feel like a recommendation you need to make, because I think it's already happening. We need to go in with our eyes open as to what our partners, a few potential future partners' finances look like.
So maybe it's just perhaps a note in the minutes that we kind of recognise the importance of benchmarking at this time, financial and otherwise, and thinking through these issues.
Yeah, that's fair comment.
Okay.
Sorry, I was using chair's prerogative then to think aloud. Councillor Forder, who were next on my list.
Actually, the only reason I'm speaking, I was so excited by the opportunity to disagree with Councillor Rawlins. It's very rare that happens, and probably the last time. Anyway, but I was just actually, I think most of what I was going to say about benchmarking has already been said. But I don't think benchmarking is just financial, actually. I mean, it's a matter of establishing best practice, really. And I think that will be very important. I mean, we can talk about at government levels and what the government says, but the fact is, if you start amalgamating, I noticed we've been using the word devolution. I see no devolution in what we're being talking about here. The amalgamation and reorganisation of councils, there's going to be a bum fight within those organisations as to whose procedures are adopted, and people will stick by what they do because that's the easy way to do it. It always happens in any merger. And so I think having that sort of information base is really important. So I don't think I'm saying anything new there that hasn't been said. With regard to internal audit, I agree with Councillor Rawlins, and the fact that we have all these recommendations from the Internal Audit Department does show that it's a very, very effective department. But I think this is a slightly different issue, because this isn't actually as coming up with the recommendations, and finally it's the actual carry through of actually getting the recommendations through. And I was a little concerned when I saw that there were ones, for example, outstanding from 2019, and I know that we review this on a regular basis, and we see this, but when you see them amalgamated like that, I think it would be nice to see a little bit more progress, and actually to have a much cleaner book in terms of internal audit as we approach amalgamation with whoever we're going to amalgamate with. So I would suggest that would be a good area to have a little push on if there are the resources to do it.
Thank you, Councillor Skinner.
Yeah, I also wanted to agree with Councillor Rawlins. I think where there are things that we would, in the normal course of events, recommend, but which are actually pointless, I think we should specifically say, in the circumstances, they're pointless, because there may be people who feel they ought to do them, and that really requires a policy decision to say, yes, we ought to do them, but it doesn't make sense. And I think that certainly applies there. I think also where we are doing something like benchmarking for a different reason, so we've said we're benchmarking again because of LGR. I mean, we've been told a lot about how much pressure there is going to be on officers because of LGR. Then I think something like the benchmarking, in order to, you could describe it in just different ways, but we just say prepare for LGR. Again, it should be brought out and costed as part of the cost of doing LGR, and that's why it's being done. But finally, on internal audit, I want to disagree with Councillor Rawlins, just because as Councillor Ford has said, the volume of points is somewhat worrying, but that's not actually what has been bothering me. And Councillor Rawlins referred to, when we've looked at a lot of these points, we understand them. That's quite unlikely that having looked at them, we understand them, because we're not in daily contact with these issues. And in any case, it's not really our business to understand them. It's our business to see overall, are things being done the way they say that they're being done. So my real objection has been that the sheer volume of apparently high value, high risk audit points is much too much. And we really do need somehow to find a way to slim that down. Otherwise, we don't look, when you take that particular view, we don't look like a particularly good council. At least I hope we don't, because the rest must be really awful. So we do need to find a way to refine it so that we, in terms of audit points, can just look at something and say, yeah, there aren't any serious ones. Let's move on to the next business. But it's not how it looks today.
Yeah, it was just, I mean, we started with a conversation about benchmarking, which I think was benchmarking that was originally planned was about improvements, comparative other councils and improvements in financial and service and so on. But that's sort of irrelevant in a way now. So are we saying actually it's not worth doing that? I'm not going to have a chance to bring in the improvements. If we're going to do benchmarking, it's because of local government reorganisation, and then to decide whether that's worth doing on its merits, and if so, how? Because it might be actually yes, it is worth doing, but just do it quick and dirty. Because you've got a comparison then of the things that might be relevant come LGR. So what you do is influenced by why you're going to do it, which has changed.
The one caveat I'd put on that is until the day we cease to exist, we're still obliged to seek economy, efficiency, and effectiveness in everything we do.
Yeah.
So the benchmarking of how our costs compare to others, I think we need to do to serve both purposes. I think the point that where Councillor Rawlings' observation comes in is if the closer to the deadline for LGR you get, you're not going to make a big investment in a service change. So I think if you identified something now that we're perhaps a little bit more, cost a little bit more than other councils, but it was going to take us 5 years to change that, you're not going to start on that process today. If you identify something where we're a bit more expensive than other councils, but actually it's a quick fix, I don't see why we wouldn't do that at the moment. But I think the challenge would be there are now, as you will have picked up during the budget setting conversations, there are major projects that we will not do now because it's not for us to make those. It's not for us to make those calls. It's for the organisation that comes after us to make those calls. I still think there's a role for the benchmarking as recommended here in terms of our day-to-day business going until we cease to be, because we're obliged to do that under the best value laws. We may not enact everything that analysis brings forward, but we will also need that analysis to inform what comes after us.
Yeah, understood. And I suppose it's just making sure we don't spend money trying to save money.
Yeah,
that we're not going to be able to implement. So all we've done is spend the money.
Yeah,
trying to find out, and then we can't do it.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And your point about sort of the fact that we still need to comply with all of the regulations and the value for money as we exist, and we've got a kind of rough idea of dates.
Yeah.
But they could change.
They could change.
Suddenly it could move forward a year or 2 years, and then it's so it's like although it's going to take a lot of resource to work on preparing for the change, we also need to keep making sure that we're doing what we can to make sure that we're providing good services and value for money and taking responsible financial decisions during that period. And although we've got a rough idea of what that period might be, just based on sort of anecdotal experience, sometimes things take a bit longer.
As it stands today, we don't have a definite end date.
No.
And the budgets that have been set for both councils, if it's not April 28 anymore, it suddenly becomes April 29, April 30, then and our estimates for future funding come to pass, then one or both councils have some difficult decisions to take that will be informed by that benchmarking. In an alternative scenario, the numbers aren't as bad as we think. LGR happens on the timetable we think, and we don't have to go down that road. But as it stands at the moment, the scenario where LGR is pushed out and we have financial problems is still a real scenario. It still has the potential to be a real scenario.
That's good. Did you want to come back?
No, well, I think Simon's probably just destroyed my point.
Oh,
sorry.
I was hoping that might be an argument for including the Brown Bingham project, but we haven't got a date.
Okay. Did you want to come?
Just as an extra point, obviously we've looked at transformation activities. There are some areas where we're looking to have different processes, different IT systems. Those might be the areas where there would be some merit in having check references that we're on the right path.
Right, so in terms of voting on this, so we have to consider the report. Obviously, we have considered it. There's been some good discussion here and some good points made. In terms of voting, what do I need to do on this one? So we just need to vote to say that we note the report, basically. Yeah, okay. But there's no other kind of changes or anything to be. Oh yes, there is a change, isn't there?
There'll be a final version.
Final version.
So
Yeah,
do you want me to advise on our recommendation?
that would be helpful. Thank you, Becky.
So we can consider the external auditor's results report 2023-24, and also to authorise the head of finance in consultation with the co-chairs to approve the actions from the external auditor's report, subject to there being no material changes in the report being confirmed to the committee by Bishop Fleming.
Yeah, that sounds good. Everyone happy with that as a recommendation?
I was just going to say that actually.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I'd like to propose for bail. So we accept the recommendation just read out by Becky there. Councillor Border seconds that. So is everyone in agreement on the bail side? Thank you very much.
I would like to propose that recommendation, but also make it known that the contributions of councillors and comments is actually noted as well.
Yes.
That's my proposal.
So
second, Councillor Rawlings, all in favour? Thank you. It's unanimous.
That's not me.
Okay.
Just before we move on to the non-financial part of the thing, which I know we're all anxious to do, I'd like to express, and as I'm hoping speaking on behalf of both committees here, my deep appreciation and thanks to Simon and all of his team for the immense amount of hard work that goes into the preparation of these accounts. And it's becoming increasingly difficult, obviously, as LRG rears its head. And I hope that if you all agree, we'll ask Simon to pass on our appreciation to his team.
Yeah, thank you. I will do.
And I'd also like to thank Alex and Neil from Bishop Fleming for joining us this evening and answering all our questions, but also for all of your work on this as well. It was a long agenda. So thank you very much for all of your efforts, and yes, we'll look forward to seeing the final versions and signing off.
And if they want to leave now, they can.
Yes, if you'd like to leave now, you're very welcome to stay. But if you would like to leave now, we've finished the sort of financial section, so I'll leave that up to you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Okay, right, so item 12 then is the Oxfordshire Leaders Joint Committee Terms of Reference, which is something that we've asked to come back to committee, so we've discussed this in its early days. And Councillor Thomas is here in the room, and I believe Councillor Ruane is online. So I'm going to introduce it.
I can do yep.
Yeah.
I think.
And Suzanne Malcolm's on the line as well if there's any questions afterwards that technical or but So Councillor Thomas, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. So obviously we had great scrutiny if and some of you were in the room for that as well. I appeared online last night and David was here in person, so we thought we'd swap it around a bit for so having discussed it at scrutiny, we've got lots of good feedback, and now we'll take it to you guys. So thank you very much for having me. So just a bit of background. So following previous discussions in November last year at both scrutiny and JAG, we took back the feedback provided to the FOP discussions on the revised TOR terms of reference. Clearly, since then, we now have to recognise that there has been an element of shifting emphasis and role of what has been called FOP, given pending devolution and local government reorganisation, which obviously, as we see today, is like it affects everything. So, despite that, we have managed to put together officers have managed to put together an acceptable, we think, form of terms of reference. The key changes being the name of the group, the membership, which is there's now 6 constituent authorities being at the meeting. That the advisory groups have been removed, and if necessary, task and finish groups will be established to discuss any sort of topics or specific projects. The scrutiny function has been removed. Scrutiny had been top scrutiny, and I know some of you have been on top scrutiny. Had representatives of each council. I think there was 3 from each council, and to be correct, we had to have at least 1 member of each council there. I think one of the last times we met, if not the last time, it wasn't correct because I think county council hadn't sent any representatives. So there has been a bit of a issues around the top scrutiny committee. So it has been removed. However, there is an ability for individual councils to use their own scrutiny committees to look at items, and obviously you here today looking at this as well. But ultimately, it is unlikely that any decisions are going to be taken by the joint committee because it's a very minimal chance of that. So it remains as a joint committee, or it always has been a joint committee, to cover the remainder of the Oxfordshire Housing and Growth Deal and related capacity funding. So if there are any decisions, that's where it would be. And as I described it last night, so I feel it as a pivot point where we are closing off that last bit. There's very minimal sort of stuff coming through. We have set structures like the the local nature recovery partnership. I think that's right, and the Oxford Inclusive Economic Partnership, as well as there's sort of 3 separate organisations within clustered together, and they will keep going, and we will be receiving reports from them. But so we're sort of almost saying goodbye to what has happened in the past. We're focusing on a much more limited work program going forward, and it is also, and I think crucially, an opportunity to talk in public about local government reorganisation, and that to me is critical. As I said, officers have sought to narrow focus of area of business onto generic projects such as the local area energy partnership. I've just got the acronym in front of me, so I have to work it out. The net zero route map and action plan. Officers have also sought more flexible wording around it being a forum for discussion. The only change of the MOU is the name of the committee, so the memorandum of understanding is the name of the committee. So speaking at scrutiny last night, we recognised that the new joint committee may not be what we would have designed had we started from scratch. However, we have done the best we can to ensure a much reduced forum, want a better word, with a more limited scope and, in my opinion, a better scrutiny function, while enabling a forum for discussion of local government reorganisation in a public setting. So that's about it for me. Obviously, you probably have a different focus than what was last night. So if you have questions for me or David, please.
Thank you. And Councillor Ray, did you want to add anything before I open up for any questions?
No, I think with last night and tonight, I've probably exhausted myself already. But happy to take questions.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so does anyone have any questions or points, Councillor Rawling?
I think we discussed last night that really there were three things going on in this group. There was dealing with the rump of the OGD. There was future stuff, planning and whatever, and that with all the caveat about the sovereignty of the individual councils' capacity to make decisions. And there was local government reorganisation. And clearly for the end of the OGD stuff, that's very much decision making. For the local government stuff, it's probably a forum, a place to have a conversation. And we recommended a bunch of changes. In section 4, we said that we should probably say that it's principally a forum for discussion. That's its main function. It's not a board, a decision-making body, or any of those sort of things particularly. It's principally a forum for discussion. It was clarified that actually for dealing with the end of the OGD, there wasn't really a need for majority voting or casting chair or any of that stuff. So we said, right, well, let's strike a line through section 6 and say it's by consensus only. That's how it will proceed. Any decisions it makes will be by consensus. And then section 7, we said, well, that only makes sense if you say that the quorum is that all represented councils are present in the room. You can't just say, well, 4 of them are in. You actually have to say they're all in, because that's what consensus means. It was also pointed out that if that's the way we go, then you don't need a kind of corporate scrutiny thing that was half proposed at section 11, where the chairs of each council come together and make and review this corporate decision, because actually it's the member councils who are sovereign here, and it should just go through their normal scrutiny process. There was some other debate about the name, and I think most people said they might not think it very important, and that if it was old jock or whatever the expression for the Oxfordshire Leaders Joint Committee is, we'll find. The key point probably is that it's not a board, and it's not a body that is telling Oxfordshire what to do. It's a place for discussion, and many of the whole section on section 5 about strategic planning, and most of that, it was agreed, will not come to pass. So that's it. I thought they were quite sensible recommendations, and I would have thought that from a governance point of view, saying it's a forum for discussion, saying it's section 6 by consensus only, and saying that the quorum is all members, and that 11 was wrong about scrutiny, it should be to the councils, was a pretty good conclusion.
Councillor Tom?
Can I just ask a more simplistic, more basic question? Considering a lot of the elements here has been removed, scrutiny, in terms of making decisions, etc., what's the purpose of this? What's the purpose of this committee?
Well, there is still ongoing work. Can you put the brakes on this? There is ongoing work. As I said, there's the Oxford Inclusive Economic Partnership and the Local Nature Partnership, which Dave chairs. And there are a number of projects that have been funded through the Growth Deal that we need to have oversight of. And I believe there is still a little bit of funding there as well, which is why we're a joint committee still. So as well as that, and it's been recognised that we need to have an open public forum in which we can discuss local government reorganisation. I think that's very critical because there is no such forum at this point in time. And as we go forward with so many moving parts and so many different options and a very tight timetable, I think, given that this is not a perfect forum, but it is a public forum, the only one we've got, I think it's really important that we use that to discuss LDR and devolution as we move forward.
So from what you just said, the only real benefit of this committee is the meetings are now held in public.
They've always been held in public.
No, as in, what you were saying is, it's a discussion forum that can be happening in a public setting. So, as I say, yes, I understand why it's happening, but as I say, a lot of the functions of it has been removed. So I'm questioning long-term benefit of this committee, but that's, the terms of reference are just more about the remit rather than anything else.
It, as I said, like from the outset, it has been overtaken by LGR. So we're not going to keep on going on this in this committee format as an item, because if we don't know which pattern of unitarisation we're going to go for or going to be put upon us, but whatever it is, if it's a whole county unitary, we're not going to have people saying, "Well, the joint committee there discussing," because it will be one council. So that's just it would be redundant. So we will come to that point, I'm sure.
I think Councillor Conway wanted to come in as well. Do you want to add to that, David?
Yeah, Councillor Carney is right. In the long term, it won't have a purpose, because it'll either be replaced by an Oxfordshire unitary or it'll be replaced by a strategic authority. And the big strategic decisions will be made there by the mayor and the strategic authority rather than FOP. So there'd be no point in having FOP in the long term. But that, and in your earlier discussions, you were talking as if we were going to be closed down next week, and we've got a couple of years before this all gets sorted. So at least. So it has a purpose over that time. I think it actually has two purposes. One is there are various forums where you need one Oxfordshire voice or someone to represent Oxfordshire. If it's not FOP, then it's the county council. And the government has shown a clear preference for talking to upper tier authorities rather than lower tier ones. So in talking to government, I think we're quite lucky that the county council has consulted us as much as it does. But there are also things like England's Economic Heartland, the Local Nature Partnership, the Inclusive Economy Partnership, where there is one representative of the Oxfordshire councils. The Integrated Care Partnership as well, which I sit on. There are probably other ones that I don't sit on, but I seem to be the representative in all of theirs. So there's one place, there's a place where we need a representative who goes along to represent Oxfordshire or the Oxfordshire councils and reports back. So that's one purpose that it has. And the other purpose, as Bethia has said, is to have discussions that we would otherwise have in private, in public. And this is something that I feel very strongly about, particularly as we move on with local government reorganisations. There are various meetings of officers and council leaders that are held in private. I think it's for transparency reasons, it is far better that we have those discussions in public and people see what it is that we're discussing. So there's an agenda that can come to either to scrutiny or to joint scrutiny, and the public can come and ask questions. So two main purposes. One is where there's a voice needed for Oxfordshire, where without this it would be the county council, and the other to have discussions in public where otherwise they would be in private. And I think both of those are actually worth having.
I understand, Chair, that there was a very extensive discussion at joint scrutiny last night, and there's no point, I think, replicating that. We have got the committee, so there's not much to be done about it, though it does rather remind me of the story of the committee that was formed to produce a horse and finished up with the camel, looking at the way this turned out. I rather wanted, however, to concentrate on joint audit and governance committee, which is why we're here. And this committee has financial implications, so I understand, for both of the councils here, but there's no budget brought here for us to see whether this is, whether this is value for money and all those other things that we were talking about just now. And I'm a little bit surprised by that omission, but perhaps I'm wrong. So that's the point that I would put.
So one of the things that picking up on what you said, I've been in the past, I've been on FOP and I've been on the FOP scrutiny panel, which is not a committee, doesn't have the same powers as a committee. I was very much an advocate of getting rid of this committee. But there are some things which I do agree that is better, like the discussions about LGR being in public and making sure that the great deal is, that is kind of drawn to its conclusion in the correct way and that all councils have oversight of that. I think one of the biggest problems I had through working with the FOP on both sides of the table was scrutiny and auditing and understanding where the decision was made and therefore where the scrutiny takes place. And I think that the scrutiny panel was kind of used as it's been to the scrutiny panel, and so it didn't come back to the individual councils, committees, scrutiny committees and audit committees when it should have done, because people were like, that's handled over there. So I'm hoping that by removing the scrutiny panel, it actually clarifies where the scrutiny and audit needs to happen, and like you say, just make sure that we're kind of a bit more aware of that and ask for things to come to be looked at in more detail, individual council by council. And a lot of my understanding around a lot of the financial parts of the great deal, the county council is the accountable body, so that would be the main place, audit and scrutiny at the county where that would be looked at. But I'm assuming that we would be able to sort of say, actually, can we have a look at that as well, just to make sure what are the financial implications for our councils as well. So I'm just hoping that this sort of streamlined version will actually help with some of that oversight.
I think I saw as chair, just to put, sorry, as you know, my favourite thing is in making sure you can't speak. I think I might just to confirm what I was saying. I was actually talking about the direct costs of running this.
I see what you mean.
Yeah. That's right. There's a budget which I think county pays and we have to reimburse or something like that. And I'd have thought that we would want to see that before we can make any judgment about whether there's value for money in this thing.
Yeah. Councillor Rains, did you want to come in on that?
That's what I'm going to do.
Sorry, Cam. Did you want to?
I take it. We make a contribution towards FOP, which is £100,000. It's in our budget, so it's open to be discussed at the time that we produce that budget, I guess, as to whether that's a good thing to have in our budget. But as has been said, the county council is the the responsible accounting body, so they would do the actual spending of that money and any auditing of that. So I think it's part of our budget in the same way that any other contributions we make to any other cross-party bodies or whatever. I don't think it's any different to lots of other things that we spend in our budget.
Councillor Thomas, did you want to add to that?
I think the budgeting of this it's got a bit of a history, I think. The budget was covered for FOP, or joint committee or whatever, at the November JAG. So you probably, I don't know whether you do remember that or not, but it was covered. You should have extensive knowledge of that, and obviously officers probably can fill in the details better. There's £100,000 a year contributed by each member council. It's just the administrative costs, as far as I understand. It's split between FOP and the two organisations, the OEIP and the thank you. I have a real problem with that one. And so it's split that way. Previously, I'm not sure if it was this the year before, looking at Simon, or the year before that, we did put in a discretionary post bid, or post bid, I don't know if it's discretionary or not, to put some money aside to sort of fill officer time, because so much officer time was going into all of the ags, as I call them, and the scrutiny and everything. There was a lot of resources from our council that was going towards the upkeep of FOP. But now, as we've stripped away it all and to get back to the bare basics, that cost, it has sort of dissipated. There has been, I think there has been a report written, just a mini report about this. I'm sure officers probably would be best to describe that.
Yeah, if someone wanted to add any detail.
Yeah, and Suzanne, correct me if I get this wrong, but firstly, if you like, the direct costs is the 100,000 that's been referred to, but that does go to FOP and it goes to the inclusive economy, OIEP, and the local nature partnership. So that's 100,000 per council for each of those three things. Beth here is right. A discretionary growth bit was put in to effectively pay for that's the direct running cost. The underground is the direct running cost of those organisations. Discretionary growth went into the budget to actually pay for the officer time in preparing our responses to things that came out of FOP as much as anything. Again, Suzanne, I want to comment on that. Or the extra work that was generated by FOP's existence rather than the running of the democratic process. As it stands at the moment, because obviously we've set the budget and nothing's changed until this goes through, so those budgets remain unchanged at the moment, but clearly there's an opportunity there to revisit those as we go forward. Suzanne, have I got that right or wrong?
Well, spot on, Simon. I think the only thing to add is obviously there was a question, I think, it came via scrutiny about possible savings as a result of slimming down of the focus of FOP going forward. But in effect, it probably is minimal at this stage because it's difficult to know what exactly this group's going to do going forward. Clearly, it's going to evolve and it's going to change over time. So I think that's something we can keep under review and obviously review our financial contributions going forward. And there's mechanism to do that through the MOU.
I was just going to add that unfortunately, while it's like officer time has been brought back from all of the complicated advisory groups and everything, it's now being taken out again, but that's for LGR. So that's just something to consider separate. So, but I think.
May I just come back on this? This is my point.
Okay, yeah, possibly can come back on Mike.
I'm sort of still a bit confused, which is always means something else, of course, because what we're being told is there was a budget for FOP, but this isn't FOP, so it's something different. We're being asked to produce. We were being asked to approve or comment on a new set of references for a new body. And we don't quite know how much it's going to cost, but we think that we've have brought back some officer time. And then we're being told again that it's going to change anyway. And it just seems to me that it's very difficult to make any decisions on this sort of basis when there's so much uncertainty. And again, I would go back and say that given the body has changed, we should be looking at how much this is going to cost to finance, Because otherwise, how can we say whether this new body is value for money or worth doing unless we have a good, firm idea of how much it's going to cost? So that's my point.
Yeah. Want me to come back on that?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, the 100,000. I mean, we say it's split into three. And I think it is roughly split into thirds. One bit is FOP, which is now the joint committee. One bit is to the Oxford Inclusive Economic Partnership, and one bit is to the Oxfordshire Local Nature Partnership. Got it that time. And those last two, they're pretty much staying the same as far as I understand. So they are doing very good work, and they are staying the same. So that's the shall we say 66,000 going to those two, and then the remainder would be going to FOP. And I did try to get organised. So there have been some suggestions that the resource, this is from a report produced by officers following the reset of FOP. In practical terms, at most, the resource released by the reduction in meetings would be less than one full-time democratic services officer. So even if this saving of a fractional role could easily be achieved, it would represent a very small saving to each partner once shared out in 6. So that work has been done. I don't know whether it's the committee is willing to accept that, but I think there probably isn't very much in it. I can understand your point that it's a different. You say it's a different organisation. It's not really. It's exactly the same. Slimmed down, and the slimming has stopped officer time being involved in all of the gumph around what FOP is. FOP now is a very simple mechanism. If I showed you the awful diagram that I saw when I first became leader of the huge structures that went into FOP, it was absolutely incredible. Now it is bare basics as far as I'm concerned, and that's where the savings are, in reducing the officer time spent on those activities.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for pointing out about the 3 organisations and saying that's really helpful. I think, I would say it's a bit of a lack of financial rigour about this so far, but I suspect that probably comes down from Oxfordshire as much as it does from our 2 councils, and sort of it's a bit difficult managing things like that. But I just think when we look at things at this committee, it's very important in order to assess whether there's value for money. We know what they're doing and how much they cost. And at the moment, we only really with the papers, we really only have 50% of that information.
Mike?
Yeah, my thoughts was we probably don't have that 50%, and forgive me on this. So I'm an independent member, so I'm not a councillor. When I came to look at the document, I very swiftly became lost in it. We don't seem to have a lot of clarity on purpose. The first heading is purpose, and it begins, the Oxfordshire Leaders is a joint committee of the 6 councils of blah, blah, blah. That's not the purpose, that's what it is. The next bit is all about the background of the growing economy and so on. And then we get to what looks like the purpose with the actual bullet points in there. But I'm hearing now that the purpose is, so that LGR discussions happen in public, which, totally with you on that. But that's not down here as a purpose. And I just, that's the whole document, to be honest, I think just needs restructuring and really tightening up, and that can then give you real focus on what the purpose is, and why this matters is if you don't have laser focus on it, is that you get scope creep, you get overreach, you get duplication, and ultimately the danger of self-justification in terms of existing, and it just needs to be so much clearer, and to have what the deliverables are and the desired outcomes and so on.
Yeah, I'll just jump in if that's okay, Chair. But yeah, obviously this has been a very complex negotiation between 6 councils to get a paper that's acceptable to all. I know officers, largely, but also monitoring officers have got it, have worked incredibly hard to get something that is acceptable to every council. And while it may not look, and it may need some rejigging, I don't know. The bare basics of what is there have been, I think, they were accepted last night at scrutiny, obviously with the recommendations that have already been mentioned. So I do understand your point, but it has been it's been a very long road to get to this point.
Okay, I mean, if it's so difficult to put it all together to the satisfaction of those involved, I'm to be honest, I'm thinking it's actually the public, the voters and so on, ultimately, who I think if they've got to look at something like this, they need clarity. And certainly if it is something like, a public forum for discussion on issues that they have input on, absolutely fine. But it just needs to be really tight document that's clear, and then we'd be clear on the purpose. And once you've got that, you can get an idea of whether it's value for money as well.
Councillor Rollins?
Yeah, this is the Joint Audit and Governance Committee. We do audit and we do governance. Value for money, it seems to me, is something that belongs to scrutiny. The reason this paper is before us is about governance and about whether this affects the governance of our councils. And so for me, this stuff about stopping mission creep, saying it's principally a forum for discussion, it's consensus only, quorum is all members, and scrutiny is through the member councils, that deals with all of those proper governance issues, and we're asked to recommend this as it stands, and I'm saying no.
So we're asked at the moment to consider the report, so we don't need to, so we can make recommendations, but we don't necessarily need to vote to support it or accept it, I guess.
My proposal would have been is that we just note this report and not approve it, because I think what the reason why David and Betty are here is seeking our approval or saying that we approve this. I just think we just note it. There's nothing else.
It came back to this. We requested that it came back here because we considered the report previously. Was it in November?
Well, there are so many flaws in it that we can't.
Yeah.
I'm not opposed
so we just note it to say that people bring it to us, but take our comments on board and revise it. But I wouldn't want to support this.
Okay.
I definitely don't think we should sign off on that on this governance.
Okay, so I'll go to Councillor Skinner and then Councillor Roberts.
I don't think we're being asked to approve it.
No.
It says Cabinet is going to approve it.
Yeah.
So we don't even have to not approve it. Just make our recommendations.
Yeah. Okay, Councillor Roberts.
The question I was going to ask, I raised last night that if the individual councils are going to be the scrutiny function, then the paperwork has to for me to be of any value, has to have arrived at the scrutiny committees before they sit, before the main joint leaders committee actually sits. And that's going to be quite a difficult thing to achieve, because we all know it's difficult to achieve papers getting to any one committee, let alone 6 committees before it goes through. So that was my practical point. My other practical point is everybody's kind of viewing this as a way of sorting out where we go with local government reorganisation and devolution, but they may not happen in parallel. In fact, I suspect they probably won't happen in parallel. If they happen with local government reorganisation before devolution, and if 3 unitaries get proposed and accepted for Oxfordshire, how would this forum deal with that? Because that is a possibility on the cards at this point in time.
So Suzanne's got her hand up. I don't know if shall I give Suzanne first?
I was just going to come in on the governance question. In essence, the terms of reference, what's come forward is basically a revision of the existing terms of reference. So for those of you that recall seeing the previous terms of reference, they haven't changed significantly, only through the points that Bethia mentioned in her introduction. So in essence, the governance piece that you're looking at tonight hasn't really altered. It's primarily been an attempt to try and refine and tighten, recognising that has been done through partnership working. So I think, again, as Bethia said at the outset, it's been a negotiation to try and get as best we can and a document that we can all live with, but clearly not a perfect document that we would have liked to seen.
Thanks, Suzanne. And then on the points that Councillor Roberts was making, did you have anything to add there, Suzanne? Or Councillor Tom?
I'll probably let Bethia and David comment on that first.
Sure.
But firstly, just may I say, I do understand your point about how difficult it is. I've heard today that the County Council, which is the governing body, hasn't actually managed to schedule its meetings for approval before the next FOP meeting. So they will not be the terms of reference at Cabinet before the next FOP meeting. So
that is a problem.
Yeah. They did have the opportunity to, but I believe there's been an administrative error there. Could you just repeat that last bit of your question?
The last one is that there's a possibility of 3 unitaries being proposed on the table at the moment. If Oxfordshire became 3 separate unitaries, how would this body then continue work on? Would this body still function for continuing work on the 3?
I think. I mean, there's a lot going on in that question, and obviously
it's really for a kick off.
Currently we as our council and South Council would think there's only 2 viable options on the table, but obviously other people disagree. I think we have to put, this is diverting the point of sort of tonight's meeting, the report, but March 21st, we have to put the sort of outline in, end of November, the final plans go in. It's a tight timescale, even if you look at November, but I think we need to make sure that we are still able to speak in public, because up until this point, a lot of what's been going on, and David explained this much more eloquently than I am right now last night, but it has been behind closed doors. And you may have heard of the Thames Valley meetings of council leaders, including Swindon and the Berkshire councils. That's all been in private. There's been no public agenda. We do not want that to continue. We do not want that to perpetuate. This is a forum, and we don't know where we're going. We won't know for a while where we're going. So let's use this forum as best we can in the time that we've got available to us.
I think Councillor Ray wants to come in, but just before that, I wanted to come back to your point about if we ended up with, say, 3 unitaries, would this continue? My understanding is no, it wouldn't, because this is an agreement between named councils, and those councils wouldn't exist.
Oh yeah.
So this document, this terms of reference, would just not be valid.
Apologies, I thought you meant in the interim, in the points until we get to the actual formation of unitaries. Yeah.
So when we get to with the devolution, So the problem is the local government reorganisation has certain functions, and devolution, and combined authorities have other functions, and we don't know which order
Yeah, I
they're
think
going to arrive on.
I would have thought that,
yeah.
when there's new councils formed or a strategic authority formed, then this would kind of get ripped up and they would make a decision.
So it get ripped up before
the committees that they wanted to.
Whichever one happens first, it would get ripped up at that point.
I would say so. I think it's hypothetical, but yes, I think so.
Yeah, I would have thought so, but yeah. Councillor Wayne, do you want to come in?
Yeah, on the first question, rather than the one about reorganisation, about the fact that FOP is imperfect and it's woolly and it's not tied down. It never has been. What we have done with this iteration of the is to cut off a lot of the wasteful bits and a lot of the capacity for mission creep by getting rid of the advisory groups, which were the ones that tended to creep. Under these terms of reference, anything that FOP discusses has to be agreed by the leaders to be put onto the agenda. What used to happen under the old FOP was that things would emerge from I have no idea where, and I would wonder why is that advisory group discussing that. So I think yes, it's still imperfect, but it's a damn sight better than the previous version of it, and there are values in it being imperfect, because one of the committee mentioned that there's a lot of uncertainty about. Well, there always is. Life's like that, and life at the moment is particularly like that. That there is a lot of uncertainty, and having the flexibility to deal with that uncertainty, I think, is a value in itself. Coming to the unitary questions, if there was a proposal that there were 3 unitaries within Oxford, then I think the world would have taken leave of its senses, and we will. This will be a good forum to point that out. I don't think there would be a future for FOP once we get into the new structure, because I think the strategic body takes that on. In terms of timing, I think there's general consensus around the Thames Valley group as well, that all has to happen together. Certainly within Oxfordshire, where we would have to know what the strategic authority is to know what the boundaries are within which we're constructing unitaries, because you can have unitaries within the boundary of the strategic authority, but whether or not Swindon is in it would determine what unitaries you might have. Whether Oxford and Berkshire are going together would determine whether you could have a unitary that went across that border. So I think the two have to happen together. And yeah, I've exhausted my thoughts on this a bit now.
Thank you. Before I've got a couple of people waiting to speak. I just wanted to check in on the time, because we've been 2 hours. Are we okay?
Yes, got until 9, then we need to vote.
Yeah. Okay. So let's try and get through it without having to extend the meeting. But Councillor Rawlings, if I come to you.
I just want to come back, if I may, to the issue of governance, Chair. Whenever I've been involved in organisations, companies, or whatever, and if I ask the question, why do we do this, please? And the answer is, we've always done it that way. I always say, well, okay, let's re-examine it from first principles then. And hearing that the governance arrangements have come down from OGD and you know, they've come along in the box with the scroll in it or whatever, doesn't impress me very much. And I'm asking, I agree with all the changes that have been made to this body, but that, to me, suggests it's a good and proper time to change the governance. That would be my only point.
Councillor Skinner?
I was just a bit concerned, and excuse me if I haven't understood this at all, We were talking about £100,000 contribution, but only a third of that was for this talking shop. The rest was for a nature body and a housing body. And officers recommended that we continue with this body because it was the oversight body for those two channels, whatever. But now we're suddenly saying the body might cease to exist. And if it does, then we will be orphaning these two presumably deserving channels. So I would go along with that. We if we should be thinking probably about them first, since they do actual work that presumably, well, I hope they do actual work that needs to be continued. So there should be some way in which they're allowed to continue, possibly by removing them entirely from the plot, but giving them to somebody else who will be able to continue.
Mm-hmm. I suppose the difficulty at the moment is we don't know who that's going to be. Yeah. So this is a imperfect way of dealing with the next 2 years.
No, I think there's a real issue, which is that if this body suddenly stops existing, which won't be anything to do with LGR, well, never mind. If it stops existing, these two other channels will be orphaned. We could give those other channels to anybody else. It doesn't need to stay here because they're not any longer part of the primary purpose of this organisation. And we just give it to somebody to an area which is more likely to not to suddenly disappear. I don't want to go through it, but they're
yeah. So my understanding is those bodies kind of have come about over the past few years, and they have kind of reported into the FOP as it was, because that's the body that has all of the councils on it, so all of the elected members sort of represented there. So it kind of sits there because they're Oxfordshire-wide projects. So at the moment you could move them, but you could move them to say the county council, but then then the districts don't have a voice in the governance of it. So it's kind of, it will all change when LGR and devolution does change, but it's only, it's kind of for the next 2 years. Do we move it? I don't know. Or do we leave it as it is?
Yeah, it's like in answering both of those questions. I think they're both important questions, but to Councillor Rawlins, to reorganise and redo the structure now and the governance now, when we've got everything else to be doing, because there's an awful lot of governance going on, but just not a FOP. It's impractical because our officers are obviously 100% on LGR. And answering Councillor Skinner, I think it is, again, an important question. We do not want to lose the good work of the Local Nature Partnership. David is its greatest advocate, nor the Oxford Inclusive Economic Partnership, which is actually not a housing association, for want of a better word. It is about bringing more people into employment and training and everything. We do not want to lose that either. But because we do not know which structure we're going to go into, it is an important question, but not one for the moment. I think it will be considered, and I think you can have that reassurances that it will be considered. But since we don't know the structure which we're going to be part of and how the county is going to sit, we can't sort of make any promises now.
Okay. So, Councillor Porter.
Just very quickly, having listened to this debate, and thank Bethia and David for being so open about this. I think what we're really being told by them is what this group is useful for. It's not what it says it is for, but actually what it might be used for in terms of local government reorganisations. And I suppose they need to judge that in a practical way as well. Sometimes you have to use what you've got rather than try and invent something new when you haven't really got the resources to do it. So I think that if they feel that this is a useful body and forum in which LGR and even devolution can be discussed, then perhaps that's the way we need to look at it, rather than sort of look through the words and the figures as we would normally do.
So in terms of moving forward for this meeting, so we've got the report. We've already mentioned that we don't need to like approve it or vote for it or anything like that. We asked for it to come back so we could consider it. We've done that. Really good discussion and really important points raised. So I guess what we can do is we can just note it and leave it there. We could make some formal recommendations, or we could make some key points that we would like to be noted and sort of borne in mind. So there's different ways we can proceed. Have you got a thought?
Yeah, I've got a proposal for South councillors, and my proposal is South councillors note the terms of reference. However, do not approve the proposed terms of reference, but ask the leaders to take note of our comments and contributions. But we allow the formulation of Oxfordshire Leaders Joint Committee to proceed. That will be my proposal. So that will be what we're saying is we note it. We're not approving it, as in the terms of reference. We're asking the leaders to listen to our comments and take note of that. But we're not saying because we don't approve it, we don't want you to carry on with it. We want you to carry on with it.
Do we do it separately for South and Vale?
We can do, or we can do it jointly. We can do it jointly on this one if we want to.
If that's seconded, I'd have an amendment.
We're not actually being asked to approve it. Do we need to?
No. But I think we should make a note of that. That there's been a lot of discussion to say actually we're not happy with it. So all I'm saying is we note we're losing it, but if it had been approved, we would have said we happily support it, but we're not supporting it. So I think that needs to be noted.
So Suzanne's got her hand up, so hopefully with a helpful suggestion.
I was just going to suggest, rather than saying approve, because you've not formally been asked to approve it, is to say perhaps something along the lines of that you don't support or you don't agree with or the terms, something like that.
Yeah, we don't support the current terms of reference. Yeah.
Is that, I mean, we've got a draft motion at the moment. Is that seconded or not?
I'll second it for the purpose of.
All right. I would like to move in a moment that we take out that business about not approving or anything.
No, we're saying we don't support it.
No, that's right. I'm just saying we should note it and ask, cabinets to take ahead. I wouldn't want to put the business about not approving it or not supporting it.
No.
I disagree. Okay.
Oh no, sorry. That's why I'm doing an amendment.
Should we get a second for the amendment before we?
Sorry, yes, second for the amendment.
If there's a second for the amendment, then we discuss it. Otherwise, it falls.
Are you seconding it?
The least I think we should put into this is to say that the governance is flawed and not fit for purpose.
Okay, I just need to have a seconder.
Peter's
seconding it. Thank you, Mike.
Really, just that we would like to see greater clarity on the purpose.
I think that's actually incorporated, Mike, in taking account of the contributions that people have made during and which Mocky had in and is in both motions. The Cabinet's being asked to take note of this conversation and the things that are being said. So it's a bit of a sweep up motion rather than have everything detailed in there. I mean, that may not be satisfactory to you, but I think that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, that's good.
Because we're discussing Councillor Porter's motion at the moment before going to the other one, I agree with everything apart from not saying we don't support it, because I think one of the purposes, Mike and I have had a discussion before, and Mike's brought it up in terms of saying some of our comments, recommendations or notes for meetings, are they robust enough? Are they clear enough? And I think by not saying that we don't support this or not having an opinion hasn't really captured the discussion. So we're saying we note it. We're saying it's not. We don't approve it or support it, or there's so many flaws or so many changes that need to be made. But we're also saying continue with it because Councillor Ruane and Councillor Bethia was saying, the reason we're doing this, we know it's not perfect, but the reason we're doing it is because we may have other opportunities or other areas to discuss. So I think
I'm a bit confused about the way this debate is taking place. We've had an amendment. Normally, I believe the person who proposed the amendment then has the opportunity to speak. But now we seem to have the person, the original proposer, arguing in favour of his original right. I think, can we just get back to some normal rules of debate, please?
Well, in that case, Councillor Ford, do you want to speak about your amendment?
Yes, that's right. First of all, I'd like to thank Councillor Khan for introducing his first motion.
But then again, okay, well, I'll come back to yours.
Yeah, of which there's very little I disagree with. But what I would say is I don't think it's necessary for us to say we don't support it. As Councillor Skinner has pointed out, all we're being asked to do is to note it. I also think it's very helpful in Councillor Khan's original motion that we are being asked to, that cabinets are being asked to take account of the debate. And I'm very confident the Democratic Services will faithfully reproduce the comments that have been made, many of which have been critical, to be fair, of what is being said. And I agree that we should be robust, but I don't think just saying we don't approve of it, actually, that's as wet as a wet dishcloth. It doesn't really mean very much at all. So what we need, if we want something that's robust, is to say this is what we want changed. And perhaps that's the sort of thing that Mr. Boone's talking about. But I think that will be incorporated in the comments that Democratic Services will include in the minutes. So I propose this as something which answers what's required of us and also gives the opportunity for firm comments to be made in the minutes for the attention of Cabinet.
Okay, that's a dragon.
I know. I'm just going to say people.
Okay, that's fine. So we are debating the amendment. So, Councillor Skinner.
I'm not quite sure which amendment I'm speaking to. I think if I was marking this as homework, I would probably put something like requires more work. If that would do instead of don't support, then
must try harder.
Okay, Councillor Rawling.
So I'm speaking against that amendment. I simply think we have a responsibility for governance. We should not be simply abdicating, and we should be indicating a view. We're advisory at the end of the day. Cabinet will make the decision, but I think it's right and proper for us to offer a view, and I think it's actually wrong not to.
Okay, so we can take a vote on the amended motion, the amendment. We vote for the amendment and then see where that gets us. So obviously we've got a proposer and a seconder. So all those in favour of Councillor Border's amendment,
which was to remove not support.
So where are we? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's carried then. So that means that the substantial motion is based as amended. So it's basically without the do not support.
Well, I think we now move to a debate on substantive motion, don't we?
Yeah. Councillor Khan.
I can't support the new motion because I think we should have had a view. And by taking that view away, we're just giving it to say, I know the leaders and others are going to take notes of our comments and suggestions, but we have just taken away our view and saying this is what we think. So I can't support it.
Okay.
You want to vote?
So yeah, so we can vote on that. So all those in favour of the proposal, sorry, the motion as amended. Yeah, all those in favour.
I think I've lost track.
Yeah, so am I.
So sort of for joint audit and governance to note the report, and obviously I'll note that additionally the committee expressed concerns on your various points.
To be reported to Cabinet.
Yeah, to be reported to Cabinet.
Okay.
So basically all we've done is saying we're just noting the report.
Yeah.
Cool.
That's cool. Okay. So, and those again?
Against.
Agree. And any abstention? Okay, that's carried then. So that's what go forward to the, so what Becky just read out is what will go forward to Cabinet with a list of the points and the concerns that were raised during this debate for Cabinet to consider. Okay. So that's that one. So we're on to work programme now. And we've got like 8 minutes or something.
I've got a long speech to make on the work.
Oh. There will be no speeches on the work programme. But Becky, would you like to comment on the work programme?
Yes.
Or highlight anything?
Thank you, Chair. So an updated work programme was published with the agenda. I've scheduled in all of the regular reports received by this committee up to March 2026. In addition, following the meeting in January, I've added a future items for consideration section at the bottom for members to add to and keep track of potential items, such as I believe there's the housing programme review that's currently listed under there.
Thank you. And yes, Simon.
I was going to make the point that, partly because I haven't mentioned it to Becky, we will need to add on the next set of accounts audit date for a separate committee. We have to schedule in from BF their opening documents for that audit. Alex has confirmed that today. And the other thing is we are, and Emily's aware of this, we are thinking of needing to move the date of the 25th of March meeting back into early April. But we'll confirm that in due course.
Okay, so be warned that the March date might move back a week or two. So we'll just keep you up to date on that. Is there anything that anyone wants to add onto the future work programme now that you've got in your head, that a burning issue that you want to include in the work programme? As ever, you can always email myself or Mocky, and we can make sure that things get added in between meetings. But Councillor Rawlings.
The only point to consider, Chair, is whether we have anything to do with LGR. As I understand it, if councils agree, then it can roll forward. If they don't agree, there has to be legislation to make that happen. And therefore, that it may be that there should be a review of that. As a little more governance thing than you can have than that subject, I guess. So just a question, really.
Yeah, and whether that as the LGR issue progresses, whether different elements of it might fit better with scrutiny as opposed to audit and governance, or it might be both again. So we need to kind of keep that under review. So maybe we just need to so there isn't a specific thing at the moment.
There isn't something right now.
I think that
agreed.
We'll all have to remember not to forget about local government organisation.
I guess
I do.
It slipped my mind.
That we feel that we need to add onto the work programme today.
Suggestion that obviously Nick Bennett, the monitoring officer, has been through this before. So shall we take away an action Beckett's call to Nick about where he thinks this committee has a role going forward?
That's a good idea, good plan. And to have them, in fact, that's almost an item for the work programme, is for him to perhaps give the committee some guidance about what are the appropriate stages, if any, for this committee to input.
Yeah, but that can only happen when there's something a bit more concrete.
Exactly, yeah.
So it needs to be a bit further down the line.
Yeah, sure it would be, yeah. Okay, in that case, I think we are at the end of the agenda, so we can close the meeting with 5 minutes to spare.
Brilliant.
So,
Can we end the broadcast, please, Susie?
Thanks, Susie.